What's up, guys? So for everybody who follows my channel on a fairly regular basis, you know that this transition integrity project, this tip, has been driving me nutso. I've been trying to get it echoed to a larger group, but it just isn't happening as of yet. Why? Well, because it gives you not just a glimpse into the dark and dreary world that is the viewpoint of the average vehement anti-Trumper, but it also shows that a certain subverted population of this country is only capable of perceiving a few different outcomes for this upcoming election. It is shown nowhere better than in the Transition Integrity Project, the biased thinking that I'm talking about. All we have to do is look right here. Appendix C is what we'll be going over today, and I'll be covering them in detail because it's the actual three scenarios that they gamed out. And the reason why I say that it's obvious bias from these people's point of view is by looking at each individual scenario. Notable, right off the bat, is that there is no actual clear Trump victory. In Game 3, in which Trump clearly wins the Electoral College, he loses the popular vote. At Game 2, Biden wins the Electoral College and the popular vote. And in Game 4, Biden wins the EC and the popular vote again, but by a narrow margin. And then Game 1 is an ambiguous result where there's an Electoral College tie and the popular vote does what they call, and this is, I'm sure, an introduction of this term into the social order, so I even hate to do it, but the popular vote does the blue shift, in which it starts out looking like a Trump victory, and then in decisive states of North Carolina, Michigan, and Florida, the popular vote begins to swing for the Democrats as time goes on throughout what they call the ballot counting process, or for what we all know to be the ballot harvesting process. The notable lack of a Trump popular vote victory either reeks of bias or it shows that the people gaming this out know that for certain they'll be able to win the popular vote. I don't know which one of those scenarios it is, but I will say that if you can ballot harvest in states that are only going to give so many electoral college votes, for instance, if Trump isn't counting on getting New York State or California State, he's going to lose those electoral college votes no matter what. But those two states, under control of Democrats, can ballot harvest. They can push the popular vote up as high as they want, within reason. But let's just go over these games real quickly and see what it is that they're thinking is about to play out after the election. This is how they see the election going. This is it. They don't see a clear popular vote, clear electoral college win for President Trump. They don't see it. It's not even possible in their minds. Now, the way they game out Game 1, they call it ambiguous, and they actually make a legitimate 269 to 269 electoral college tie. And the popular vote, they don't ever lock down what a popular vote number is, but they say that it starts as a Trump win, and it does what they call, quote, a blue shift towards the Democrats. This is how they're going to game out a scenario in which they lose, and they are ballot harvesting in the interim between the time that the vote is done and the time that the president takes office. Now, they've already started in the media shifting the narrative away from a, quote, election night. And they're doing this with intent, and it's based off of this Transition Integrity Project paper. So these are the Trump moves that they see happening in a scenario where Trump wins the popular vote, and then as ballots are continuously counted, it starts to do the, quote, blue shift. So in this scenario, they see Trump calling on Biden to concede the election on election night and attempting to halt vote counting throughout the country. They say he deploys the feds to secure voting sites and that Attorney General Barr opens investigations to prevent counting mail-in ballots. And they make, all of the necessary inferences that Attorney General Barr is being controlled by Donald Trump. The GOP publicly supports Trump's claim of victory and his claim of voter fraud, but they didn't support him deploying the military, which is What happens in this game? Trump attempted to federalize the National Guard and called on his supporters to mobilize, and they make it seem very bad who his supporters are, Boogaloo, etc., etc. And he invoked the Insurrection Act. And as we go through this, it's important to remember that these are what the people who Trump has beaten over and over again think he's going to do. These are the never-Trumpers, the rhinos, and the Dems all getting together and trying to predict a man who has caused them to whiff and counterpunched hard at every single engagement. So on election night, Biden says that victory is going to be imminent. And then he mobilizes a network of, quote, influential bipartisan elites, elected officials, and the military, close quote. And we've seen the beginnings of that already happen. Even the people in the military who are going to be used in that manner have started to poke their heads out of the ground. Biden called for massive protests. The DNC forms Protect the Vote coalitions in Democrat states. And then he establishes a bipartisan transition team. In bipartisan, we mean people who hate Trump. Notables out of Game 1 were that both parties sought to block or overturn results in different states. North Carolina went for Biden, Florida went for Trump, and that left Michigan as the deciding state. So that was basically where all the ish went down. And you got to be aware, if you live in one of these states, you got to understand you could be ground zero for this. Neither side was willing to accept results. Both pushed their supporters into the streets. So that was, this is what I've been primarily worried about, is that this tip report, it says over and over again that people are going to be in the streets from both sides. And this is the one that ended with 2 claims to the presidency on January 20th, and where Podesta just sat back and said, we'll have to see what the military does. In Game 2, they have a clear Biden Electoral College and popular vote win, and yet they expect there to be all these problems. Now, is this because of lack of understanding of the average Trump supporter or Trump, or is this because they know that it will be because of some sketchy stuff that they will have attained a popular vote and Electoral College win? We're not to know, but let's see what they say. And this is the one where they think Trump's going to be running scared and terrified of all of his wrongdoings, trying to cover them up. He moves for self-preservation and trying to limit his legal liability. He calls for, and this is interesting, DNI and DOJ investigations. Don't we find it interesting that they think that he's going to call for the DNI to investigate? Isn't that interesting? He pardons Hillary, Joe, and Hunter. That's right. In this scenario, he pardons Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Hunter Biden. Isn't it strange that they think that? And while he's supposedly burning the papers and hiding the evidence, he positions either himself or his son to run again in 2024. This is something they're extremely paranoid about. Along with, he establishes what they called MAGA TV in Game 2. This is also something that they are extremely paranoid about. And they go so far as to suggest that he would escalate tensions with Iran to put a damper on the transition, which means, in my mind, that that's something that they're willing to do. The Biden moves are as conceited as you would think they would be. He, quote, secures the election result and forms a coalition to heal America. This is interesting here. He forms the Democrats for Election Protection Coalition with the specific intent to block the DNI DOJ investigations that they say Trump would try to initiate. The question here being, Trump was made to go through all of the investigations that were opened on him, and if he made a move to shut any of those down, the whole world would have melted. But here they are in the tip report, and they're saying that that is exactly what they're going to do. Why would you block those investigations? If investigations get started into election meddling and there is no election meddling, then you let the investigations play out, am I right? And they say here that in Game 2, as in many other games, they open investigations on Trump and all of his associates, despite Biden's emphasis on the transition. Notables from Game 2, it's the Democrat pipe dream. Trump's running for the hills and trying to recoup his losses for a 2024 run, and they were already prosecuting him by the end of the transition. Game 3 is where the meat and potatoes is at, while I get a sip of my coffee. It's been a lot of late nights lately, folks. So, Game 3, the meat and potatoes. The Electoral College, Trump wins 286 to 252. Now, that's a pretty substantive lead. but it's close. The popular vote somehow goes 52 to 47 for Biden. Now, that's a surprisingly large popular vote victory, especially for somebody who lost the Electoral College. As a matter of fact, I would say that that's pretty rare for it to go 52-47. That's a 5-point popular vote swing. Usually we're talking a couple of points here. But in their minds, this is the only way Trump can secure a win. But at the end of the day, it is a Trump win. So what exactly are they gaming out? I'll tell you. The absolute destruction of the Electoral College. The Trump moves here are very telling. First of all, they say he moves to, quote, legitimize the Electoral College, as if it's not legitimate, which it is. He paints protests against the EC as un-American. This is the game where they accuse him of planting paid agent provocateurs to make the protests look violent. They also say he moves to, quote, reduce or eliminate the deep state and the broader resistance. Now, they don't say the alleged deep state or the deep state in Trump's mind or this imagined conspiracy theory deep state. They just say he moves to reduce or eliminate the deep state and the broader resistance, and that he promotes military, politicians, and judges with pro-American views. Oh my gosh. Later on, he moves to label the protests as anarchists. The Biden moves here are just as telling. The first thing is that he retracts his concession. Now, prominent Democrats have already come out and told him never to concede no matter what the election night result is. Key to this game, Game 3, where Trump won the Electoral College and loses the popular vote, is Biden's retraction. They say he moves to, quote, capitalize on public outrage, which is newspeak for capitalize on the outrage that they create. They encourage North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Michigan state recounts. And the Democrat House declares Biden the victor because he won the popular vote. That Biden also encourages California, Oregon, and Washington, like the Cascadia region, to secede from the Union unless the majority rules. They're literally insisting that popular vote rule or they secede from the Union in Game 3. Now, key to this game, Game 3, are what the game called suggestions from former President Obama. And these are the suggestions that Obama made. He put forth a 4-point plan to both houses of Congress. 1, statehood for DC and Puerto Rico. 2, divide California into 4 states. 3, require justices to retire at age 70. And 4, eliminate the Electoral College. Now, the only thing that they want is to eliminate the Electoral College and to get the statehood from Puerto Rico and DC. Dividing California would benefit both people, and requiring justices to retire at age 70 would benefit both people. So these 4 Obama suggestions, they're assuming that the Republicans have negotiated these key points so that they can get bipartisan support. And Game 3, where Trump has a decisive Electoral College win, ends with them saying it's unclear what the military would do. And the Game 4 scenario was a narrow Biden win with both the Electoral College and the popular vote. But the popular vote is less than 1%. So Biden wins by narrow margins in both areas. And again, I think this is a Democrat wet dream, but let's read on. So Trump moves are, quote, large coordinated disinformation campaign on mail-in voting. Barr blocks counting of mail-in votes. He has surrogates release disinformation that Biden had had a heart attack. He stokes chaos in the streets and mayhem by urging local police to break up BLM or pro-Biden demonstrations and encouraging alt-right or Boogaloo supporters to confront liberal protesters. He claims that electors are financed by George Soros. He makes online appeals to all enemies, foreign and domestic. They mention Q outright in one point in this report, and this is obviously a reference to the Q community taking the oath to the Constitution. He refuses to leave and is eventually escorted out by the Secret Service. He pardons everybody, burns documents, and, of course, establishes Trump TV. The Biden moves here are strange because he won, but they're making these assumptions, not me. Biden moves to frame Trump's actions as ugly and dismissive. He engages Romney. Romney gets 3 GOP senators to move to support Biden. McConnell, after the Democrat House declares Biden the victor, sides with the other GOP senators, and they get the Senate as well. It says that violent skirmishes ensue. There is an intel leak of a session of the Joint Chiefs of Staff where they're discussing resigning in protest of Trump. Isn't that interesting? Military backed Biden once the Senate did. Biden does all these amazing things and the world is saved. Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker, Republican governors, turncoat. And then once again, investigations into Trump start during the transition. So you can see, you guys, what it is that they think is coming. And game 4, the close, supposedly legitimate election of Biden, is where the tip people see the most mayhem and violence ensuing. I will tell you that the most violence and mayhem will happen in the one scenario that they did not game out in the tip report, and that is an Electoral College win and a slight popular vote win for Trump. They didn't game that scenario out, and that will also be the scenario where the most mayhem and violence ensues. But because of these people's biases, they are incapable of even seeing that they missed a scenario. And so there's a quick summation of what these people think is going to play out throughout the transition after this election. Everything in here could be of vital importance depending on how the election plays out. It is an insight into the mind of your opponent if you're paying attention to it. And there are definitely commonalities inside this report among all the scenarios that you can take note of and make plans for. Now, when I thought about, is there anything else in this report that I really wanted to highlight? It's pretty hard because it's a 20-some page report and it has a lot of detail in it. But there is one paragraph that stuck out to me, and it was in one of the appendixes called, "Can Trumpism Survive a Trump Loss?" And the final paragraph, they make an interesting observation. And this is where they say that one of the first things that must be done is that they must limit the power of the executive. And isn't it hilarious? They always show their true colors in their suggestions. They have spent decades and decades empowering the executive office, taking Congress's abilities and powers away, taking the judicial's powers away, and consolidating that power under the executive branch, the bureaucracy headed by the president. And it wasn't until just recently when somebody who wasn't in the club, somebody who wasn't foretold long ago by the councils on foreign relations and the Bilderbergs took office, that they had a problem with the amount of power the executive has. This might be the only part of the entire report I agree with them on. The executive does have too much power. It's had too much power. The bureaucracy has become larger than the organism it survives off of. I'm not upset about the powers the executive has while it's being used against itself. I've been upset against the powers the executives had for the past 25 years. Now if it's going to destroy itself, let it be done. Alright guys, I wanted to go over that because nobody's talking about it. Like, share, sub the channel. If you want to buy me a coffee, I'll put my links down in the comments below. Thanks for all your support, guys. I love y'all. I'm out of here. Peace.